For generations, we've been told that hard work, determination, and ambition are all it takes to achieve success. It's the bedrock of the American dream. The idea that anyone, regardless of their background, can pull themselves up by their bootstraps and achieve a better life. But let's be honest, folks. Have you seen a bootstrap lately? They're surprisingly hard to find, especially when the factory that made them shut down and moved overseas. In today's reality, the American dream is looking more like a myth than a reality. Rising costs, wage stagnation, generational wealth hoarding. We're basically playing Monopoly, where one person starts with all the properties and the rest of us are fighting over who gets to be the iron. And let's not forget the rigged economic system that seems specifically designed to keep the ladder of opportunity conveniently out of reach for most people. So is upward mobility a lie? And if so, who really benefits from keeping this dream alive while so many are struggling to keep their heads above water? Let's dive in, shall we? All right, let's rewind the clock a bit. Back in the good old days, and by that I mean the decades following World War II, the American dream was actually, dare I say, achievable for many. The economy was booming, wages were rising, and a factory job could actually support a family. Back then, upward mobility wasn't just a dream, it was a reality for a significant chunk of Americans. But then, something happened. Starting around the 1970s, things started to shift. Wages stagnated, the manufacturing sector began to decline, and the gap between the rich and everyone else started to widen. It's like someone replaced the sturdy ladder of opportunity with a slide, coated in grease, and pointed it directly downhill. Studies show that economic mobility in the US is now lower than in many other developed countries. We're talking about countries like Canada and even some Scandinavian nations where they prioritize both social safety nets and really good furniture design. Think about it. Your chances of achieving the American dream are actually lower if you were born in the land of the free than if you were born in the land of free healthcare and affordable college. This isn't just about a bunch of statistics. It's about real people's lives. It's about the single mother working 2 jobs, who still can't make ends meet, the college graduate drowning in student loan debt, the family struggling to afford basic necessities while the cost of living keeps skyrocketing. And let's be clear, this decline didn't happen by accident. It's the result of deliberate policy choices that have favored the wealthy and powerful at the expense of everyone else. Okay, let's talk about wealth inequality. It's a term that gets thrown around a lot, but what does it actually mean? In the simplest terms, it means that the gap between the haves and the have-nots is wider than a canyon, and there's a very rickety, unreliable bridge strung across it. Now, some people might argue that a little inequality is natural. After all, we don't all want to drive the same car or live in identical houses, unless we're talking about those adorable tiny house communities. But here's the thing. When wealth gets so concentrated at the top, it starts to warp the very fabric of society. It's like a game of Jenga, where a small group of players have built a towering skyscraper on one side, while everyone else is left with a few wobbly blocks. So how does wealth inequality actually keep people trapped in poverty? Well, let's start with education. In America, the quality of your education is often determined by your zip code. If you're lucky enough to live in a wealthy neighborhood, you're more likely to attend well-funded schools with experienced teachers and plenty of resources. But if you're born into poverty, you're often stuck in underfunded schools that lack basic supplies, let alone things like art programs or updated textbooks. And it doesn't stop with education. Wealth inequality also affects access to healthcare, affordable housing, and even healthy food. If you're constantly worried about putting food on the table or keeping a roof over your head, it's pretty difficult to focus on things like education, job training, or even just taking care of your mental and physical health. But here's the real kicker. Wealth inequality isn't just bad for the poor, it's bad for everyone. When a large portion of the population is struggling to make ends meet, it drags down the entire economy. Now, let's talk about another cherished element of the American dream. The idea that anyone can pull themselves up by their bootstraps and become a self-made millionaire. It's a tale as old as time, or at least as old as Horatio Alger novels. But let's be real, folks. Most bootstraps are made in sweatshops overseas, probably by someone who's never even had a whiff of the American dream. The truth is, the gap between wages and the cost of living has become a chasm so wide, you'd need Evel Knievel and a rocket-powered shopping cart to jump it. Wages have remained stagnant for decades, while the cost of everything from housing to healthcare to a gallon of milk has skyrocketed faster than a SpaceX rocket. Meanwhile, the cost of education has gone completely bonkers. College tuition has increased at a rate that would make even the most seasoned Wall Street investor blush, leaving graduates saddled with mountains of debt before they even enter the workforce. And let's not forget about the ever-growing mountain of debt that's become a permanent fixture in the lives of many Americans. This debt trap makes it nearly impossible for many Americans to get ahead. They're stuck in a cycle of working to pay off debt, leaving them with little to no money to save, invest, or even just enjoy life's simple pleasures. The American dream shouldn't involve a spreadsheet and a constant sense of impending financial doom. All right, we've talked about the widening wealth gap, the stagnation of wages and the crushing weight of debt. But how did we get here? Well, it's not some cosmic accident, my friends. It's the result of a system that's been carefully crafted to benefit the wealthy and powerful, while the rest of us are left to navigate a labyrinth of loopholes and roadblocks. Think of it like a game of Monopoly, where the rules are constantly changing in favor of one player. They get to move their piece twice, collect double the rent and draw from a special deck of get-out-of-jail-free cards, while everyone else is stuck playing by the original rules. One of the biggest ways the wealthy maintain their power is through their influence on the political system. They spend millions, if not billions of dollars, lobbying politicians and funding campaigns, ensuring that laws are passed that benefit their interests, even if those interests are at odds with the well-being of the majority. And speaking of taxes, let's talk about those loopholes, shall we? The wealthy have access to an army of accountants and lawyers who can navigate the tax code like a pirate captain navigating a treasure map. They're able to shelter their income, exploit deductions, and find creative ways to pay lower tax rates than their secretaries, their drivers, and probably even their pet goldfish. Meanwhile, the rest of us are left to grapple with a tax system that feels about as fair as a coin toss, where the coin always lands on tails and then bursts into flames. The wealthy also have a vested interest in maintaining the status quo, even if that status quo is leaving millions of people behind. So we've covered a lot of ground here, and it might seem like I've sucked all the hope out of the room, like a dementor at a birthday party. But here's the thing. Just because the American dream is on life support doesn't mean we can't revive it. It's going to take a defibrillator, a team of skilled surgeons, and probably a whole lot of coffee, but it's not impossible. First things first, we need to address the root causes of inequality. That means tackling issues like income inequality, wealth disparity, and the systemic barriers that keep people trapped in poverty. It's not enough to just put a band-aid on a gaping wound. We need to perform major surgery on the system itself. One of the most effective ways to reduce inequality is through progressive taxation. That means asking those who earn more to contribute a larger share of their income in taxes. And before you start clutching your pearls and screaming about socialism, remember that progressive taxation was a cornerstone of American economic policy for decades, back when the middle class was thriving and the American dream felt within reach for more people. We also need to invest in education, healthcare, and affordable housing. These aren't just social programs, they're investments in our future. When people have access to quality education, healthcare, and affordable housing, they're more likely to succeed, contribute to society, and boost the economy. But it's not just about government intervention. We also need to address the role of corporations in perpetuating inequality. That means holding them accountable for paying their fair share of taxes, providing living wages and benefits to their employees, and operating in a socially responsible manner. And let's not forget about the power of collective action. Throughout history, ordinary people have achieved extraordinary things when they've come together to demand change. The fight for the American dream is not over, It's just entering a new chapter. So is the American dream dead? Well, it's certainly on life support, but it's not beyond saving. The truth is, the American dream as we've been sold it is out of reach for most people. The ladder of opportunity has become more like a slippery slope, greased by inequality and rigged rules. But understanding why it's broken is the first step towards fixing it. We've seen how wealth inequality, stagnant wages and a system that favours the few over the many have eroded the promise of upward mobility. But here's the good news, it doesn't have to be this way. By challenging the status quo, demanding change and fighting for a more equitable society, we can breathe new life into the American dream. Watch now to uncover the truth about upward mobility and whether the American dream is officially dead. Spoiler alert, it doesn't have to be.